At 21, she thought she knew where her life was headed. She had grown up in a world where every decision was weighed against strict expectations, and every step was watched. But one mistake, one misstep in the eyes of her family, was enough to alter her path forever. She was cast away, not with a gentle farewell, but with a harsh sting of punishment. No one spoke for her, no one defended her, and as she stood there with nothing but a small bundle of belongings and a heart heavy with fear, she realized she was truly alone. The land stretched endlessly around her, vast and unforgiving, and she had no map, no guide, and no plan, only the echo of her family's rejection and the question of how long she could survive on her own. The desert sun burned against her skin. As she wandered, each step crunching over dry earth that seemed determined to swallow her whole. Hunger gnawed at her belly, thirst clawed at her throat, and fear crept in with every shadow that shifted around her. The silence of isolation was louder than any crowd she had ever known, and at night, the cries of coyotes reminded her that she was a stranger in a world that did not forgive weakness. Yet, even in her despair, there was a stubborn spark inside her that refused to die out. She wanted to live, even if her own people had turned their backs on her. She wanted to prove that she was more than the mistakes that had branded her an outcast. And then, just when she thought the end had come, she was found. At first, she thought it was another test of fate, another cruel trick of the land. Figures appeared in the distance, moving with quiet strength, their faces calm but unreadable. They were Navajo, people whose ways she had heard whispers of but never truly understood. She had been told stories, some filled with fear, some with awe, but none of them prepared her for the moment when they approached her with water in their hands and a language that rolled like music through the air. She expected judgment, perhaps rejection, but instead she was met with a choice: follow them and live, or remain alone and risk death. She followed, though every part of her hesitated. What did they want from her? Why would they help a girl abandoned by her own? The question sat heavy on her tongue, but she kept silent, watching, listening, and learning. The days that followed were unlike anything she had ever imagined. She was shown kindness in simple acts, a bowl of food passed to her without demand, a blanket placed over her shoulders during a cold night, quiet words of comfort when her eyes betrayed her tears. Yet she also saw discipline, rituals, and traditions that carried deep meaning, woven into every movement, every song, every story shared around the fire. It was in those moments that she began to understand that she had not been cast away to be broken, but to be reshaped. Her punishment had led her to a place where survival was not just about food or water, but about spirit and connection. But trust is not built in a day, and though they had opened their world to her, she felt the weight of their watchful eyes. Some welcomed her presence, while others questioned her right to stay. She had to prove herself, not just to them, but to herself. Could she carry their ways, respect their land, and embrace a new life that was never meant to be hers? Her journey was only beginning, and the shadows of her past had not fully released her. Every dawn brought new challenges. Every night brought dreams of the family she had lost. The desert no longer seemed like an enemy, but it was still a place that tested her limits. The Navajo who had taken her in were not saviors in the way. She first thought they were teachers, and they demanded strength, respect, and humility. She stood at a crossroad she could not yet name: remain as a guest on the edge of their world, or step fully into it, knowing she might never return to the life she once knew. And so, at 21, with her old life behind her and an uncertain path ahead, she stood between two worlds, her heart torn and her spirit unsteady. What she could not yet see was that her greatest trial was still waiting, one that would force her to choose not only who she wanted to be, but where she truly belonged. The first nights she spent among them were restless. Even though they had given her a blanket and a place near the fire, she could not escape the feeling of being an outsider. Every flicker of flame cast shadows that seemed to watch her. Every hushed conversation reminded her that she did not belong. She would turn her head quickly when she caught a glance, wondering what they thought of her, wondering if they whispered about why she was really there. The food she was offered was different from what she had known. The sounds of their language carried a rhythm she couldn't follow, and yet there was something in their way of moving steady, deliberate, grounded that stirred a quiet awe. Within her dot by day, she was led to the edge of their camp and shown the land around it. A woman with deep lines carved into her face, lines that seemed to tell their own story, walked with her and pointed to plants, showing which ones healed and which ones harmed. She didn't speak much, only giving short words, and at first the girl felt foolish, nodding without understanding. But she began to see the care in each gesture, the way knowledge was passed not through long explanations, but through experience. She was told to touch the leaves, to crush them between her fingers, to smell them, to remember them. It was a different kind of learning, one that went deeper than books or lessons she once knew. At night, when the air grew colder, she listened to the sounds of drums and songs that carried across the camp. Sometimes she was invited to sit closer, to watch as stories were spoken into the fire. She did not always know the meaning, but she could feel the weight in every word. These were not tales told for passing time. They were history, warnings, lessons, and prayers all at once. She realized quickly that every part of their life had meaning, each song tied to memory, each ritual tied to survival. Yet for all that she observed, she still felt a wall between herself and them. She could not shake the thought that at any moment they might decide she did not deserve to remain. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with suspicion. She had been cast away once already, and the thought of being cast away again gnawed at her heart. So she rose early, before the sun broke, to help where she could, carrying water, gathering firewood, watching the children while the elders worked. She tried to prove with her actions what she could not yet say in words, but there was another challenge she could not escape, the silence of her past. At night, when her eyes closed, she saw the faces of those who had abandoned her. She replayed their words, sharp and final, that had cut her loose from the only life she had ever known. She questioned herself endlessly. Had she deserved it? Could she have done something different? Or was she simply paying the price for being born into expectations too heavy for her to carry? That grief weighed on her more than hunger or thirst. She hid it well during the day, but in the quiet, it returned with full force. The Navajo who had taken her in seemed to sense this, though none spoke of it directly. One evening, as the fire burned low, an elder sat beside her without invitation. He did not look at her at first, simply stared into the flames. His voice was steady when he spoke, telling a story of someone who had been left in the desert long ago. The figure in the tale had been forgotten by their own, but instead of dying, they listened to the earth, and the earth showed them a new path. He said no more, only rose and walked away, leaving her with the echo of his words. She realized then that they understood more about her silence than she thought. Still, she wondered about their true intentions. Why had they not turned her away when they first found her? Was it pity? Was it obligation? Or was there something they saw in her that she could not yet see in herself? The uncertainty filled her with unease. She felt caught between two truths. One, that she was broken and unwanted, and another, that she had been given a second chance. But chances come with cost, and she had not yet discovered what hers would be. The days stretched into weeks, and though she grew stronger, she noticed she was often tested. A simple mistake, like forgetting which path to take back from the river, was met not with anger but with quiet disappointment. The hesitation when asked to carry out a task was not ignored, but neither was it forgiven. She understood then that, Kindness did not mean softness. They would help her survive, yes, but survival meant more than breathing. It meant becoming part of something greater, something she had to earn. There was one morning that stood out above the rest. The woman who had first shown her the plants came to her without a word and pressed a stone into her hand. It was small, rough, and ordinary in shape, but the woman told her it was hers now. No explanation followed, but she carried it with her, unsure of its meaning. Sometimes she turned it in her palm when doubt crept in, as if the weight of it could remind her that she had not been completely invisible. Yet the gift also left her unsettled. Why had it been given? Was it a symbol of acceptance, or simply a test to see if she valued what seemed insignificant? Every answer only seemed to lead to more questions. The more she observed their ways, the more she realized how little she understood. Their connection to the land was unlike anything she had known. Where she once saw empty stretches of desert, they saw a living world full of signs and teachings. A shift in the wind, a mark in the dirt, the call of a bird, each carried meaning. She felt both amazed and small in the face of such knowledge. Yet even as she slowly learned, the shadow of her old life never fully left her. Sometimes she thought she heard voices in the wind, as if her past was calling her name. She wondered if those who had cast her out ever thought of her, if they regretted or even remembered. That longing was a wound that refused to close. She began to feel torn between two worlds, one that had rejected her, and another that might accept her, if only she could find the strength to step into it fully. And then, just as she began to grow comfortable, something shifted. The mood in the camp grew heavier, conversations became hushed, and eyes turned more often toward her when they thought she wasn't looking. She felt the tension in the air, though no one spoke it aloud. A storm was building, not of wind and rain, but of choice and consequence. She could sense that soon she would be asked to face something greater than survival, something that would decide not only her place among them, but also the truth of who she was meant to be. The fire still burned at night. The songs still rose. But beneath them was a silence that pressed harder against her chest. She knew now that the kindness shown to her was not the end of her journey, but only the beginning. Something waited just beyond the horizon, and whether it would break her or build her, she did not yet know. But she could feel it approaching. And there was no turning back. The unease in the camp grew heavier with each passing day. She noticed it first in the way the children, once quick to laugh around her, had grown quieter when she came near. Then in the way the elders spoke more often in hushed tones, their voices low but their eyes sharp, as though measuring something invisible. At first, she told herself it was only her imagination. The fear inside her painting shadows where none existed, but soon she could not ignore it. Something was shifting, and it was not only within her, it was around her, pressing in from all sides. One evening, as she carried water from the river, she saw two men watching her. They did not speak, but their eyes lingered too long. It was not unkindness, not exactly, but it was a question she had no answer to. She lowered her head and kept walking, though her heart raced. When she reached the fire that night, she sat at the edge, far from the circle, and listened. She could not understand all the words, but she caught enough to know that her presence had become a matter of debate. The woman who had given her the stone still showed her patience, guiding her through tasks and correcting her with a firm but steady hand. But even she had grown quieter, as though holding back something she did not wish to say. The girl sensed a test was coming, one that would either allow her deeper into their world or push her back into the desert. And the thought of being pushed out again, left alone to wander, filled her with dread. She had barely survived once. She was not sure she could survive a second time. At the same time, she found herself torn by a different pull. In her dreams, she still saw the faces of her family, the people who had cast her away. Sometimes they looked at her with anger, sometimes with sorrow. She woke from those dreams with a weight on her chest, unsure whether she longed for their forgiveness or cursed their betrayal. That inner conflict gnawed at her during the day, and the more she tried to hide it, the more it seemed to surface. The Navajo people were observant. They saw the way her hands trembled when she thought no one was watching, the way her eyes drifted toward the horizon as though searching for something that was gone. One night, when the fire burned low, the elder, who had once told her the story of the outcast, returned. He sat beside her again without speaking, and for a long time they both watched the flames. Finally, he asked her a question in slow words she could understand. Do you belong to the people who left you, or to the land that saved you? She had no answer. Her throat tightened, her eyes stung, but she said nothing. He nodded, as if her silence was answer enough, and rose, leaving her with that question burning in her chest. The days that followed only deepened the tension. She was taken farther into the desert with a small group, shown how to track, how to find water. Hidden beneath dry earth, how to read the sky for signs. It was grueling, and though her body grew stronger, her mind remained heavy. She knew these lessons were not only for survival. They were to see if she could carry their knowledge, if she was worthy of it. She felt as though every step was being measured, every decision marked. Some of the group spoke to her kindly, offering small gestures of encouragement. Others gave her nothing but silence, their faces unreadable. But there was another conflict stirring, one she did not yet understand fully. In the camp, a few voices grew louder in opposition to her staying. She overheard enough to know that not everyone believed she had a place among them. Some saw her as a burden, a mouth to feed who did not yet give enough in return. Others whispered of bad omens, of bringing in someone cast out by her own people. She felt their words even when she could not catch them all, and it cut deep, reopening the wound of rejection she thought she had left behind. And yet, there were moments, brief, fragile moments, when she felt something shift in the opposite direction. A child slipping her a small carved figure of an animal, a young woman braiding her hair without being asked, a laugh shared when she stumbled but quickly caught herself. These gestures reminded her that she was not entirely unwanted, that there was still a chance to belong. But chances could vanish as quickly as they appeared. The woman who had given her the stone finally spoke of it one morning. She told her the stone was not just a gift, but a reminder that even the smallest thing carried weight if you chose to give it meaning. The girl clutched it tightly in her hand, feeling its rough edges, wondering if she had the strength to give meaning to her own life in the same way. But she also wondered if she was being asked to let go of her old self completely. Could she truly leave behind the person she had been, or would the ghosts of her past always follow? As the weeks turned into months, she felt herself caught between two forces, the pull of her old world and the demands of her new one. The conflict was not just in the camp, it was inside her. She had been raised to obey, to follow rules without question, to fit into the shape others had chosen for her. But here, survival depended not on obedience alone, but on understanding, resilience, and choice. Every lesson, every look from those around her, pushed her to decide who she wanted to be. The suspense in her life was no longer about whether she would live or die in the desert. It was about whether she could transform, whether she could rise from the ashes of abandonment into something stronger. But with every step forward, the weight of her past dragged behind her, threatening to pull her down. She feared that the moment would come when she would have to prove herself completely, and that if she failed, there would be no second chance. One evening, as she sat near the fire, she heard her name spoken in a way that made her blood run cold. It was not a call, not a welcome, but a warning. She looked up to see eyes fixed on her, not with kindness, but with doubt, perhaps even with anger. Something had shifted again, something deeper this time, and she knew that the true test was drawing near. The fire crackled, the songs rose, but beneath it all was a silence that threatened to consume her. She did not know what choice would be asked of her, or what she would have to sacrifice, but she felt the storm pressing closer, and with it the knowledge that her place among the Navajo was hanging by a thread. The air in the camp grew heavy, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Every sound seemed sharper, the crack of wood in the fire, the distant howl of coyotes, the restless wind scraping against the tents. She felt it pressing on her chest, the unspoken tension that had been building for weeks. It was no longer just glances or hushed conversations. Something was coming, something that would decide whether she would be allowed to stay or be cast out into the desert once more. One morning, she woke to find the camp unusually quiet. The women did not speak. As they prepared food, the children stayed close to their mothers, and the men gathered in a tight circle near the edge of camp. She could not hear their words, but she could feel the weight of them. When she tried to step closer, the circle grew still, and one of the men looked at her with eyes that seemed to pierce through her. She lowered her gaze, clutching the stone. In her hand, the one gift she had been given, and felt her palms sweat around it. That night, the elder called her to the fire. His voice was low, steady, carrying the kind of weight that could not be ignored. He told her that the time had come for her to face a trial, not a punishment, but a test. A test to see if she truly belonged, or if she was only clinging to them, because she had nowhere else to go. The words struck her like a blow. Her heart pounded, her breath caught in her throat, but she did not speak. She only nodded, though fear raced through her like fire dot in the days that followed. The camp prepared. She did not know what the trial would be, only that it would take her away from the safety of the circle, away from the firelight that had become her fragile shelter. Some people avoided her, as though she had already failed. Others gave her quiet looks of encouragement, fleeting but enough to remind her she was not completely alone. The woman who had guided her placed both hands on her shoulders and whispered words she could not fully understand. But the tone was clear. It was a blessing, a wish for strength. The night before her trial, she could not sleep. The sky above was wide and full of stars, stretching endlessly in every direction. She lay awake, staring at them, her thoughts tangled. She thought of the family who had abandoned her, wondering if they would have laughed to see her now, trembling in the desert, about to prove herself to strangers. She thought of the small kindnesses she had been shown, the blanket on a cold night, the carved figure given by a child, the stone pressed into her palm. And she thought of the silence that always followed her, the silence that whispered she did not truly belong anywhere. When dawn came, she was led out beyond the camp. A small group walked with her, their faces unreadable. The desert stretched ahead, endless and vast. The elder stopped and turned to her. His words were simple: survive. Survive and find your way back. The desert would be her judge. Her hands shook, her throat felt dry, but she nodded. They left her there, the sound of their footsteps fading until there was nothing but wind. Alone again, she stood with her heart pounding in her chest. The sun rose higher, the heat pressing down, and memories of the first time she had been abandoned flooded her mind. The fear of dying alone, the ache of hunger, the sting of rejection, all of it returned. She closed her eyes, clutching the stone in her hand, trying to steady herself. This was not just about survival. This was about proving she had the strength to belong, the strength to create a new life out of the ashes of the old one. The hours dragged on. She searched for water, for shelter, for any sign of guidance. She remembered the lessons she had been taught: how to read the sky, how to track the smallest signs in the dirt. Every step felt like it mattered. Every mistake could be her undoing. The desert was merciless, testing not only her body but her mind. As night fell, the cold bit into her bones, and she huddled against a rock, clutching the stone like it could protect her. She whispered to herself, words of determination, promises not to give up. But beneath it all was fear, deep and unrelenting. The second day was worse. The sun was harsher, her thirst greater, her strength weaker. She stumbled more. Often her vision blurred. She thought of turning back, of giving up, of letting the desert claim her. But each time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of those in the camp, watching her, waiting. She knew if she failed, she would not only lose them, she would lose herself. On the third day, she came across tracks in the sand. For a moment, hope surged. She followed them, heart racing, but soon realized they led not to safety but deeper into the unknown. The desert seemed to mock her, offering glimpses of salvation only to take them away. Still, she pushed on, every muscle in her body screaming, every thought in her mind begging her to stop. As night fell again, she collapsed to her knees. The stars above blurred, her chest heaved with ragged breaths, and for the first time she wondered if this was how it would end. Alone, forgotten, lost. The thought brought tears she had held back for too long. She wept into the silence, her tears sinking into the sand. But then, in the stillness, she remembered the elder's words, survive. The desert would judge her, but it would also teach her. She lifted her head, forcing herself to breathe slowly. The wind shifted, carrying with it a sound distant, faint, but real. She strained to hear it, to hold on to it. It was not the cry of an animal, not the howl of the wind. It was something else, a sign, a test. Her heart pounded as she rose unsteadily to her feet, clutching the stone tighter than ever. Every nerve in her body was alive, every step a battle. The desert loomed vast and unforgiving, but within her was a fire she had not felt before. The trial was not over. The hardest part still lay ahead. And as she moved forward into the darkness, she knew the moment of reckoning was close. The sound that carried on the wind guided her through the night, faint but steady, like a promise hidden in the vast silence. Every step she took felt heavier than the last, yet something deep within urged her forward. The desert no longer felt like only an enemy. It was watching her, testing her, pushing her to decide whether she would yield to its cruelty or rise with its strength. She clutched the stone tightly, its rough edges digging into her palm, reminding her that even the smallest things could hold meaning if she chose to give them weight. As dawn broke, the light revealed a shallow pool hidden between two rocks. It was small, hardly more than a reflection of the sky, but it was water. She dropped to her knees and cupped her hands, drinking until her body felt alive again. It was not much, but it was enough to remind her that survival was possible. She rested there for a time, listening to the stillness, and realized that she had faced the same moment before, abandoned, broken, and desperate. But this time she was not the same girl. She had been taught to listen, to see signs, to carry meaning in the simplest of things. That knowledge was her anchor now. The next hours blurred together as she walked, using every lesson the Navajo had given her. She watched the sun's path, marked the ground for tracks, and listened for the whispers of the land. Hunger gnawed at her, but her determination carried her forward. By evening, when her strength was close to failing again, she saw smoke rising faintly against the horizon. For a moment, she thought it might be her mind playing tricks. But as she moved closer, she recognized the patterns of the land and knew it was the camp. Relief swept through her, but fear followed quickly. She had survived the desert, but survival alone did not mean acceptance. The trial was not only about finding her way back, it was about who she had become in the process. When she staggered into camp, the people turned to look. Silence fell, heavy and complete, as they took in her worn figure, her cracked lips. dirt and sweat covering her skin. She stood before them trembling but unbroken, the stone still in her hand. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the elder stepped forward, his eyes steady and unreadable. He asked her what she had learned. Her voice was hoarse, but she spoke with all the strength she had left. She told them she had learned that survival was not about strength alone, but about listening to the land, to the silence, to the lessons that came without words. She said she had carried the stone because it reminded her that even the smallest gift could carry weight if you believed in it. And she told them that though she had been cast away once, she had come to understand that belonging was not something given, it was something earned, something lived. The elder studied her for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded once, slowly, and turned to the others. No words were spoken, but the silence shifted. It was no longer filled with doubt, but with recognition. She had faced the desert and returned. She had been tested, and she had endured. From that day forward, she was no longer only a guest. She began to take part in the rhythms of the camp fully, not on the edge but within the circle. She gathered food, tended to fires, learned songs and stories, and in time began to pass them to others. The children once again laughed when she came near, and the women worked beside her as though she had always been there. The man who had once looked at her with doubt now nodded in quiet respect when she carried more than her share of the load. Yet, the conflict inside her did not vanish overnight. She still thought of the family who had abandoned her, still wondered if they remembered her at all. But the pain of that rejection began to lose its sharpness. She realized that while they had cast her out, the desert and those who lived within it had given her something greater, a chance to remake herself, to find strength she had never known. The longing for her old life faded into something different, not regret but understanding. Some doors close because they are meant to. Some endings come so that new beginnings can take root. Seasons passed, and she grew into her place among them. The lessons of survival became part of her body, part of her spirit. She could track the signs of animals in the dirt, find water where none seemed to exist, and read the stars as if they were maps written just for her. But more than skills, she carried with her the knowledge of belonging, the truth that community was not about where you were born, but about what you gave and how you lived in quiet moments by the fire. She sometimes traced the stone with her fingers, remembering the girl she had been when it was given to her, weak, lost, unsure. Now the stone no longer felt like a test. It felt like a marker of the path she had taken, a reminder of how far she had come. The trial in the desert had been her turning point, the place where she faced the shadows of her past and chose to rise instead of fall. And though her journey had begun with punishment, rejection, and pain, it had led her to something stronger than she had ever imagined. She had been cast away, but in being cast away she had been given the gift of a new life, one built not on fear or obedience, but on resilience, respect, and connection. Looking back, she understood that the desert had never been her enemy. It had been her teacher. It stripped her down to her very core, forcing her to face the truth of who she was and who she could become. And it had shown her that even when everything is taken, there is still something within that cannot be broken, the will to survive, the will to belong, the will to rise. Her story became part of the songs told around the fire, not as an outsider, but as one of their own. The children listened wide-eyed, the adults nodded knowingly, and she herself carried it not as a burden, but as a source of strength. For in the end, it was not the punishment that defined her, nor the rejection, but the way she chose to step forward, to endure, and to embrace a new life when all seemed lost. And so, at 21, the girl who had once been cast away found herself reborn in the heart of the desert, not as a victim of her past but as a survivor of it. She had faced the silence, endured the trial, and discovered that belonging was not something to be given. It was something to be lived. Her journey left one truth that lingered long after her story was told. Sometimes the harshest endings are only the beginning of the life you were meant to find.